Now that you have this website loaded into the Files panel, you can simply double-click to open any one of these documents, and I'll do that in a moment. But first, let me point out a couple of things in the Welcome screen here. One of the things that's new in Dreamweaver CS4 is this collection of videos. These actually show you how to use some of these features, and you may find these useful, especially because some of the more advanced things, like the dataset wizard, I won't be able to get to in this Essentials training. So in addition to the help files, which of course you can find under the help menu, you'll now find those top feature video shortcuts. You'll also find shortcuts to create new files, so if you want a new XML file or a CSS file, or of course an HTML file, which is what we'll be doing for most of this series, you can just click here to create a new blank page. And by the way, although I'm going to open a page from my photography website to have on the screen while I'm going through this chapter, you can actually create a new blank page and follow along. You just have to have some file open for most of these features to be visible. As you notice right now in the Insert panel, everything's grayed out. And here at the bottom in the Property Inspector, similarly, the features are grayed out. Until you open a file, you can't even change the way these look in the interface. Here on the left, you'll see shortcuts to your most recently opened files. I've just started using this version of the program, so I just have one displayed here. But as you've been working longer, you'll see this get longer and longer down the page. In the bottom left, just a little off the screen here, because of the settings I have for recording, there's a little checkbox. If you check that, the welcome screen will not appear in the future. I like to keep it open because I like these shortcuts, but you can certainly close it if you prefer, and you can always get it back by going into the preference settings in the general category. But let's start by opening a file. Dreamweaver has a very new look in this program. It's really a more dramatic change than we've seen in most of the previous upgrades to this program. Dreamweaver is now more consistent with the other programs in the Adobe suite, so if you're using Photoshop or Flash or any of the other tools, you'll see much more similarities. Similarly, Dreamweaver is almost the same on a Mac as it is on a PC. You may have noticed in this chapter I'm working now on a Windows machine. In the previous two chapters, I was working on a Macintosh, and I'll continue to switch back and forth as I go through this series. But the program itself, the way Dreamweaver works and looks, is almost the same on both systems. One of the differences is the location of this button here. When it comes to customizing the interface, this is one of the most important options. Dreamweaver now has even more preset workspace layouts than it ever has before. So right now I'm in the designer option, but if I wanted to switch, say, to coder, you'll see things look quite different here. By default, if you've never used this before, when you click on coder, you'll just see code view like this. But you can always switch over to design if you want to see the design, or to split if you want to split the view, even within the coder settings. One of the biggest differences between the coder and the designer options has to do with the placement of the panels. Notice they've moved to the left side of the screen here. If I come back over to designer, they'll switch over to the right side of the screen. You can also get the classic view. You may have noticed that the insert panel here is now in the top right. It used to be, if you're used to previous versions, up here at the top of the screen. And if I choose classic view, you'll see that it returns to that space and that the icons get their color back. Another somewhat subtle change in the interface in Dreamweaver is that all of the color's been removed. So here you see the classic view, the way Dreamweaver looked in previous versions, with all these colorful icons all over the screen. Almost everything has a corresponding color. But if we move into the designer view, which is what I'll be using for most of this series, notice that everything's turned gray until I roll my cursor over it. Adobe did that quite intentionally, and the idea was to make the program blend into the background even more and bring your focus even more to the design and the colors of the design that you're actually working on. So you'll see the colors if you roll your cursor over, and you can get them back if you really want to by choosing Classic View. If you like the Insert panel over on the left, you can move it, and the way you open and close these panels is simply clicking on the gray bar. So if I click there, you see it opens. If I click here, we'll open the CSS Styles panel. Some of the panels like this have sub-panels within them or secondary panels underneath them. When you click on a style, you'll see the style properties listed in the Properties pane. If you don't see some of those things, you may have to click and drag to expand or reduce them. And in addition to being able to open and close them by clicking on the gray panel, you can double click on the name itself. You can also move these, so you can click and drag to detach them, and you can have floating panels, which you can move anywhere around the screen or move to a second monitor if you like to have two monitors. You can also dock them, so if you want your insert panel back in its old location, you can bring it up to the top, and as soon as you see that blue line there, when you let go, it'll dock at the top of the screen. Remember, you can always reset the work layout, so if you ever want to get back to the way things were, just choose Reset Designer or reset whichever workspace you've selected. Again, we can close the split view, so we're just seeing Design View. And one other thing I want to show you with the panels over here, there is a reduced panel size. So if I click on those double arrows at the top right screen, you see they take up a little less space here, which can be handy. Get a little more room for working on your design. Click again and they expand. But in their reduced mode, if you click on an individual one, it will just pop out where you can use it, and then click again and it'll go away. You can always reset the workspace to get it back to where it was. And one last thing I want to show you as you're customizing the workspace. With split view, you can click and drag to have more or less split view. And if you're not familiar with working with this, there's some really nice features to split view in Dreamweaver. For example, if I click on this image, Dreamweaver highlights the corresponding code in code view. Similarly, if I click on the text here, Dreamweaver will highlight the corresponding code, and I can immediately see how and where this is formatted in the corresponding code. Very handy if you're trying to troubleshoot what's going on, or you want to learn a little HTML as you're going along. I will give you a crash course in some basic HTML code in a later chapter, but keeping the program open in split view is actually a very nice way to start getting familiar with the code. For the purposes of this training, I'll stay in design view most of the time, but I want to show you one new option in Dreamweaver CS4. You can now split the code vertically as well as horizontally. This wasn't possible in previous versions, but if you've got a nice wide monitor and you like having the code over here on the left instead of taking up the top part of the screen, you can now do code vertically. And one last thing, if I reset Designer while I've got that set in vertical, it will stay in vertical. So that is one of the few things that you actually have to put back by selecting, again, under the View menu to return it to horizontal. And then I'll stay in Design, and we'll keep the program looking just about like this for the rest of the series.